Forgive the pun, startering conversations and citizen-led documentation projects. I want to talk to you today from a slightly different perspective, as Lori intimated, than my colleagues have so far. And I want us to tell the story of how we're weaving Starter into the work of the Vermont Historical Records Program. And this is a program of acronym soup here, VRAB, which is based at VISARA, so Vermont State Historical Records Advisory Board at the State Archives and Records Administration. And we don't have collections as the VHRP. The State Archives has had a Preservica instance for a long time, and that's a separate venture. But I've been talking with Lori for some time about we share a passion for smaller historical records repositories and how to better serve them. And so she had told me that this new program was being developed by Preservica called Starter. Eventually, the name came out. And it struck me immediately that this would be a wonderful tool for helping further all of these different goals of the VHRP, which includes providing technical assistance through site visits and workshops, connecting organizations that are interested in collaboration and identifying opportunities for collaboration through regional or statewide initiatives. And we also wanted to start engaging more directly with citizens and civic engagement projects that were inspired by them and what they wanted to accomplish. And the VHRP started, I should note, as a part-time temporary position in May 2017. And thanks to funding from the Secretary of State's office, under which the State Archive sits, and the NHPRC, that wonderful funder of historical records repositories and initiatives, we've been able to grow the program to be now 2 full-time employees. And we're doing so many different things that we're constantly feeling like our own capacity is stretched, but working whenever we can to connect all of the different entities within our small but mighty state. So in order to be more strategic about our programs as a whole, we've identified different designated communities in the state, smaller historical societies and community archives, and looking at these specifically kind of with a readiness for digital preservation and digitization initiatives. We've identified that these small folks, they're usually digitizing things in order to post on Facebook. Maybe they have a website. There's occasionally something that you might think of as more of a repository, usually using Omeka, but they're not thinking about long-term preservation or frankly even short-term preservation. Another group is mid-sized repositories. They may have someone who's a professional who's working either part-time or full-time and have already some substantive chunks of digitized content, may have some born digital material they're also aware they want to try to maintain over time. And the third and fourth categories could be conflated. The big gorillas, as I fondly call them, which there may be 2 in the state, that have full-time professional staff members and maybe providing online access to their own digital content, as well as maybe from other repositories. And kind of alongside and with that group, you have the colleges and universities, our flagship university, UVM, being a large part of that. And awareness at that level of how many born digital institutional records there are that are proliferating and that they do not have a great handle on and don't have any sort of strategy for maintaining over the long term. They do usually have a wider number of staff members, at least, to do it. So Starter came along in 2020 and has been just a tremendous catalyst for conversations with all of these different communities to get them talking about digital preservation and then the need to do this. So for the different groups, these different communities, there's different strategies I've employed. And for the bigger repositories, it's often having a bigger, hold on a second. Forgive that. Trying to have a higher conversation about how to tie in with our DPLA Access Hub, and they're more attuned to the need for digital preservation. For the medium repositories, the fact that the Preservica was looking for beta testers was a great opportunity to reach out to them with a simple survey to see just basics about how much digital material they had, how ready they felt about trying to preserve it for the long term, and inviting several institutions to do beta testing along with the VHRP. For the smaller repositories, we are going to be, with thanks to an HPRC funding, we're going to be getting a mobile scanning unit together and making it possible for them to use the equipment for scanning days with us right there, and being able to give them training on everything from how to, good enough scanning practices to what metadata they should use. We'll be basing it on Dublin Core, which is a nice segue into Starter, and showing them Starter. And as Joan has said, having all those cards is a great, having something that will automatically take care of providing online access as well as doing the digital preservation and automating a lot of that digital preservation makes it a lot easier for me to make the case for the need. As Joan said, the sea of yawns that people often meet you with when you want to talk about in great earnestness the value and importance of digital preservation. Not that I'm just giving up and only talking about how wonderful Starter is for access. Also got some funding to bring in Northeast Document Conservation Center later this year and into next year to do 5 sessions around the state where they'll talk about digital preservation and the need for it, and raise awareness and education about it. I've also kind of had to let go of my idea that what we need is one centralized statewide repository and that's going to be what's going to fix everything for everybody. In my limited time in Vermont, I've become aware of the specific culture of this state where we don't really have county organization or government. It's at the municipal level, and often those are very small municipalities. It may be hundreds of people, and there's a real pride in doing it on your own and doing it your way. So what I'm trying to do is find different ways to help people provide better access to and preserve for the long term their materials. So if they want to set up their own instance and they think they have the capacity to do that, I'm happy to support that. We are also at the same time working toward developing a statewide repository and have submitted a couple planning grants along with some of the big gorillas, including the Vermont Historical Society and the Department of Libraries. And Starter also inspired, it got me to the table with the executive director of the State Historical Society, who was interested in hearing about what the possibilities might be. So again, it allowed me to get access to some of these communities that I hadn't yet gotten a foothold in. And we're using our own instance. Again, we don't have collections, but we're using it as an opportunity to engage with citizens in their own documentation efforts. And we've done a couple things. The one that started it all was this confluence of COVID, Preservica offering free space for existing Preservica clients who wanted to build out COVID collections, and a couple professional photographers reaching out to the state archivist wanting to preserve their documentation of the impact of COVID in Vermont for the long term. So we worked with those two photographers and developed those collections out. So we have that as some part of what we can demo to folks. And in a kind of different project, you might recall that at the inauguration, Bernie became something of a sensation for his choice of garb at the inauguration and spawned thousands upon thousands of memes. The Vermont Folklife Center, one of the larger institutions in our state, put out a call for folks to contribute memes, their favorite memes of Bernie, and was somewhat startled at how many came in. So I've worked with the archivist there, and he was happy to have those be added to the VHRP's digital repository. So we're doing that, and again, this is where capacity comes into play. We're doing that as we can. We're adding some of the memes from the Vermont Folklife Center's collecting initiative. And we did different things. The COVID collections have pretty extensive Dublin Core metadata, and Andy, one of the photographers, had his subjects also respond to extensive questionnaires, and in some ways those might have the greater long-term value because they kind of capture where people were at in March and April of 2020. The memes, because of the way they've come to me, I have very little context to work with. So if folks had given a little bit of information, I am including that, but it's not getting nearly the level of treatment as the COVID collections have so far. The other challenge about working with citizens is we're kind of at the whim of their ability to work with us. So for better, Andy has gotten back to work. So what I would say the more interesting part of his work was after he did these photographs of his neighbors, he went out and started documenting businesses, the National Guard doing food drop-offs, and other things like that. But the metadata is not yet in place. So working with him about whether we put those up with maybe a little bit less context than the portraits have, kind of more along the Bernie line, and looking toward other opportunities to add materials to the VHRP in order to demonstrate how it could work for people. Because as Sana says, it makes it so much less abstract if you can show them this is where your stuff will go. And one thing I know I want to do is to get up a set of obsolete formats, because one of the amazing things that Starter can do is it will render obsolete formats. So they might have a Word perfect file that they can't open, but if you put it into Starter, it's now renderable and you can read it again. So much more to do, but very exciting to have this tool to work with and to keep putting in front of these different communities here in Vermont to try to engage them in this larger endeavor of preserving digital materials for the long term.